What are some of the lesser known impacts that people often overlook, and how can they proactively address them?
So there's a lot of presumptions about environmental impacts, human health impact. So even you would think like a solar farm, well, who cares about noise? Well, most solar farms have a substation, and substations have transformers, and transformers make noise. So that's something you need to think about, even if you think it's probably not a big deal. So do you have a spill prevention control and countermeasures plan in place? Another one that was kind of a hot topic here locally.
Renewable energy is essential for reducing our carbon footprint, but its success depends on more than just installation. It requires a deep understanding of its unforeseen impacts. Without proper planning, these projects can create challenges for both the environment and local communities. Thoughtful development and community education are key to ensuring long-term success. In this episode, I'm joined by Tyler Marshall and Melissa Tiedemann from Stanley Consultants, who specialize in navigating these complexities. They will be talking about the lesser-known effects of renewable energy projects, the importance of public engagement, and the critical need for responsible decommissioning plans. If you're a civil engineer or industry professional working in renewable energy, this episode is packed with valuable insights to help you balance sustainability, community impact, responsible growth, and long-term project success. I'm Anthony Fasano, and this is the Civil Engineering Podcast. Now I'd like to welcome our guests onto the show for today. Both Tyler Marshall and Melissa Tiedemann are both with Stanley Consultants. Tyler is a principal environmental engineer, environmental discipline technical lead, and Melissa is a senior environmental planner and business development manager. So Tyler and Melissa, welcome to the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Thank you.
All right, so we're excited to have both of you. We've got an interesting topic that we're going to dive in today. But before we get there, let's hear about each of you. So why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, what you do at a daily basis at Stanley Consultants. And Melissa, let's start with you.
Great. Thanks, Anthony. I'm happy to be here. So like you said, my name is Melissa Tiedemann. I'm a certified planner, so I'm not an engineer working at an engineering firm. But on a day-to-day basis, I guess I've been here for 17 years. Started my career in a municipality. After about 5 years, I thought I'd try something different. And so my team of us joined Stanley about 17 years ago. And I guess that's the reason why we love it here is because no 2 days are ever the same. So I can't say what a typical day looks like because there's no really typical day. When I first started with Stanley, my team was doing brownfield work, EPA brownfield specifically. And so, that involved doing a lot of environmental assessments, trudging through abandoned buildings, writing a lot of grants, helping our clients secure some vital funding for some very important projects they had going on in their communities. And that's what kind of led me into the community engagement aspect, because it was also part of these grants was getting the information out to the public and kind of getting their feedback on what they would like to see in their own communities. And while I still like to do a good site assessment, these days you'll find me probably either traveling in my car or sitting at my desk writing contracts, trying to help our teams bring in some additional work and working with our clients to help illustrate Stanley's capabilities and expertise.
That's great. How about you, Tyler?
Yeah, so Melissa's been here 17 years, but I've been here 18 years, so I win. But if anything, that's kind of a testament to how Stanley has been as a place to work. I think our average tenure is ridiculously high. And, I started out my career with my educational background was kind of civil/environmental, but the more I've gotten into environmental, the more I've enjoyed that. And that's one of the great things with the role that I have is that the majority of my time is spent helping clients, both internal and external, through all aspects of permitting processes. I do kind of specialize in wastewater, stormwater, those kinds of things. But it feels like in the last few years, more and more, we've been doing a lot of support for infrastructure, both related to power generation and distribution, as well as renewables, which, the renewables have to have a distribution network to feed into. But we've been doing a lot of that kind of siting type work. But one of the cool things with the way Stanley is set up is that our environmental group, we support all aspects of the company. So, one day I may be doing some specifications for a Navy base in Japan, the next day doing a solar farm in Louisiana. So it is kind of fun. It's great for people that like variety. And then the kind of the other aspect of my role here as the discipline technical lead is helping to ensure that our QA processes are up to snuff and working with members to help them to develop on their technical career paths and trying to encourage people to get out and do things just like this, doing podcasts or publications, papers, conferences, that kind of stuff, helping people to kind of grow and kind of let people know just how smart we are.
It's great. You mentioned the permitting process, which we do a lot of PM training at EMI, and the permitting is always one of the bigger challenges for project managers, of course, because the timeline is highly variable. But that's a topic for a whole nother podcast episode.
I could
See you next
probably
week.
riff for about 6 hours on that right now.
Yeah.
If you want to, just let me know.
Yeah. One other thing I'll just mention for our listeners, if you hear Melissa or Tyler say members, that's how Stanley refers to their employees as members, which I
Yep.
think is a great term and a great way to frame things out, as a team that works together. So I just want to make that clarification if you hear them referring to that. So, all right. So we got an exciting topic. We're going to talk about renewable energy and renewables and what's going on in the industry. So let's start off with Melissa. Melissa, with the rapid expansion of the renewable energy industry, how can we prevent uncontrolled growth from leading to kind of unintended environmental and community impacts? I think that's what people fear when we talk about this.
Definitely. So I think, the unpopular opinion is to pump the brakes, slow down, be more thoughtful in the development of it. And I guess, because my background is working for a municipality and developing these ordinances so it does lay out a well thought out, whether it be a neighborhood or whatever, I think that's the best approach is to have a good ordinance or set of rules in place that this developer has to follow. And then I'm a big fan of bringing in a, kind of uninvolved third party to review that. So it's not just the entity, whether it be a city or county or whoever that governing body is, checking and making sure that this developer is checking all the boxes and crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. But you have this third party that is not involved with either one, going through and making sure that the premise behind the ordinance is being met by this developer so that, they can move forward in a well thought out pattern.
Yeah, I like that. And that's kind of an analogy to that. I think for civil engineering is if you had like a design firm and a contractor, but then you had a different firm as like a construction manager, right? Because
Sure.
they didn't do the design, but they're not part of the contractor. So they're kind of like
Right.
this third party that's kind of navigating between the two. So I like the idea of having that third party. So Tyler, renewable energy projects are designed to reduce our carbon footprint, but they can also bring unexpected challenges to local communities. What are some of the lesser known impacts that people often overlook, and how can they proactively address them?
Yeah, and that's something that we've seen, and I think a lot of people have probably seen news stories, and I've even experienced that here in my local community. We've had a huge amount of wind turbines pop up being out here on the Great Plains, and that there's a huge influx of money into the renewables industry, and there's a push to get these projects established, lay claim to land rights and to get the solar panels put up, to get the turbines put up. But inevitably, that's where things can go sideways. If you don't take your time, do your due diligence, you run into things that you wouldn't really think about. I think most people are aware of things like endangered species, like bald eagles with wind turbine. You're aware of the potential for building something on a contaminated site. That's been around for a long time. People are pretty well aware of that. But there's a lot of aspects in a good due diligence planning process and procedure that we have to think about. So noise is a big one. There was actually an article, I think, in Time magazine last year about I think it was a data center in Texas that was pumping out 70 to 90 decibels 24 hours a day. And that was causing all kinds of problems, alleged problems in the community with regards to stress and health and those kinds of things. And that's part of this too, is that the renewables industry is so young and we don't necessarily have a lot of data. So there's a lot of presumptions about environmental impacts, human health impacts, that kind of thing. But it's better to err on the side of caution, I feel. So even you would think like a solar farm, well, who cares about noise? Well, most solar farms have a substation, and substations have transformers, and transformers make noise. So that's something you need to think about, even if you think it's probably not a big deal. A lot of these sites, again, because we're talking about energy, again, you'll have these transformers, you'll have oil filled equipment. So, do you have a spill prevention control and countermeasures plan in place? How are you handling your hazardous materials? Those kinds of things need to be thought of. Another one that was kind of a hot topic here locally, and I think this is something that people have maybe generally heard of, but shadow flicker when you're talking about wind turbines, the constant the flicker of the shadow as it goes across like a person's bedroom window, or that kind of thing, that it's related to, and again, this is all, it's not necessarily proven, but it's theoretical. Kind of like how some people are sensitive to flashing lights with epilepsy, is that some people are sensitive to the shadow flicker. And so you're starting to see a lot of ordinances where they're restricting the siting of the turbines to where you have to be, so many thousand feet away. You have to do a study to analyze where the shadow flicker is. But that raises some interesting questions about property rights. So if I allow, as a regulator, a turbine to be put 1,000 feet over onto this farm field, does that mean that the person that owns the land next door, even if there's no house there now, does that mean that you're depriving them of their rights if they wanted to build a house? So it's interesting. It's a delicate path to navigate sometimes. Something that was a little interesting to me is you're starting to see a lot more consideration for sun glare when you're talking about solar panels. So, for instance, are you siting this solar farm? Are you within the flight path of an airport? And you're not just talking about, like LaGuardia, you're also thinking about like Bob's Crop Duster service.
Right.
Because you don't want to be blinding the pilots as they're on their final approach, because the sun happens to be coming in at exactly the right angle on the right day of the year. So that's something that there's actually an analysis you can do to map that impact on, and that's something we're seeing more of. Visual impacts. I mean, it seems kind of straightforward that nobody wants to see big, ugly solar panels. I mean, I kind of like the way turbines look. I think they're kind of cool, but do you need to put up a vegetative screen like shrubs and trees and bushes so that you don't see the project? Another one that's you don't necessarily think about. Well, as a subject that's been around as it relates to like high voltage transmission lines, like magnetic fields and electromagnetic fields, and how those have the potential to impact people directly, either through, for instance, do they have any medical apparatus like a pacemaker, etc., but also, does it interfere with communications? Is it throwing off enough noise that it could interfere with, radio, TV, cell, those kinds of things? So again, those are things that are all part of the process that we go through, the studies that we do. You can actually go out and measure and model how these magnetic fields and electromagnetic fields would propagate from your power lines, from your transformers, etc. And then I guess the last thing is, one of the interesting things with solar farms especially is that they tend to be constructed on leased land. It's not, the developer is not buying the land, they're buying the use of the land for 20, 30 years. And so one of the big concerns has been, okay, so, there's a ton of solar developers or renewables developers that are popping up because of the influx of money. But what happens if 5 years down the road, the market crashes for that type of power and they just walk away? We've got this huge, like 500-acre eyesore right on the outside of, on the edge of town. So, how do you deal with the decommissioning of these sites and making sure that there's financial instruments in place to let that happen? So it's really interesting, for people that like to not be doing the same thing every day. You get a lot of different aspects on these projects you have to think about.
Yeah, which is exactly why we wanted to talk to Tyler and Melissa today, because I think the initial response to renewables is it's awesome. Let's do as much as we can, which may be the case, but I think that on the flip side, all the stuff that Tyler just explained certainly has to be evaluated as part of that, which obviously, consulting firms are working on and helping clients with. And there's interesting, right? Like the shade flicker one is interesting. It kind of reminds me a little bit from like in a city, like there's height restrictions on buildings, so you're not restricting the neighbor's view type of
Yep.
thing, right? Where it's not like exactly
Yeah.
specific to your property, but you have to keep in mind things around you. So it's certainly things to
Mhm.
think about.
And
Yep.
it's more challenging now, and even because our structural engineers have done some amazing things with the towers. Those turbines are getting taller and taller and bigger, and so the shadow flicker is covering more and more ground.
Hmm.
So it's an evolving problem.
Interesting. So, Melissa, public engagement is crucial for successful renewable energy projects. Which strategies have you found most effective in educating communities and addressing some of these concerns before misinformation spreads?
I think every project that we've worked on, and even the projects that I followed that we're not part of, I think the key element every time is to start early, to be very proactive and not reactive. I mean, you want to get out and meet with those community members, meet with those stakeholders before any permit is filed, before any rezoning application has been submitted, because then, I mean, as a homeowner, I would feel, attacked. I was not approached. I was not consulted. What are my concerns? And I think this is simply like, you could even gather these people together in a small meeting. It doesn't have to be something big. And actually, I recommend it not be big. I think the personal, intimate meetings, one or two homeowners, maybe even door knocking, and say, hey, we're potentially looking at this. What are your concerns? And so you can address those up front and then let those people know when you submit that design that they were heard. If they said, "Oh, I don't want to look at those solar arrays." Wow, in that design there is a line of arborvitae going up, quick growing, it's going to block that view. Now as a homeowner, I felt heard. You heard me, you came to me, you asked my opinion, you have addressed my opinion, and now we have this certain level of trust. Trust grows. Now I'm going to talk to my neighbor and say, "Hey, they came to me, I gave them this concern, this is what it is." So I think getting out there, having these meetings, addressing what you can. Obviously, you're going to have some pretty odd requests, I think, but, address what you can, what's feasible to be addressed, and then, build build that relationship before it becomes this big public project. And, people have a mentality like, herd mentality. When you get into a public meeting and one person's angry, wow, now everybody's angry. But if you can go into that public meeting with everyone, pretty appeased, or feel confident that, you're being heard, I think, the outcomes of those public meetings are very, very different.
Yeah, it's a great point. And it's funny because a couple hours from now, I'm doing a webinar for our AECPM certification holders called How to Be a Proactive Project Manager as Opposed to a Reactive Project Manager. And I think kind of what Melissa just suggested there is really a good blueprint for any project, which is to get out early, get a good kickoff meeting, right? Engage if you have stakeholders, especially if they're public stakeholders, the community. And I think the other thing that is important in what Melissa said is, the listening, the empathizing. I mean, I think what I learned is, and I think I picked this up in a few books that I may have read around your attitude and your energy becomes a magnet. So if someone's saying something angry and you respond angry, it's going to set the whole public meeting off. But if you can stay calm and, kind of like Melissa's saying, just, take in what they're saying, thank them for the information and consider it in your design, I think you're going to have a much better relationship with the public and not going in there being so defensive, more of like, hey, we're here to help. We want to make sure that this project works for the community and we want to hear your concerns so we can try to address them. I think that's a really important. So getting out in front of it is important, and then making sure that the way you conduct those meetings in a very collaborative way, I would say, is going to be kind of your best foot forward there.
And what we've seen in some cases is that the economics kind of drives developers to try to go in quietly. They don't want the word to get out because they're concerned that landowners might say, oh, well, my land is worth 3 times what it was before. And so you have some of these projects where the people controlling the budgets are wanting to go in kind of in, almost like sneaking in the middle of the night
Right.
and secure the land rights. But what inevitably happens if you take that too far is that people talk, right? And that rumors get started. And we're in an environment in this day and age, especially with social media, where distrust is kind of the default reaction. And if you don't initiate that communication early enough and let that distrust snowball, and that's where you start getting into some of the crazier theories and things. If you don't counter that right up front, the project's doomed, because once you have 500 people in a town of 3,000 going to the mayor saying, we don't want this, you think the mayor's going to approve it? No. So it's a balancing act.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be, like I said, collaborative, and the stakeholders need to be on your side. It can't be like a us first them mentality, or else the project's likely not going to get done, because to your point, the leaders in that community are not going to want to go against the citizens of the community. So it's really like a group effort. So Tyler, when we talk about these projects, a well-planned decommissioning strategy is really essential to avoid any long-term negative impacts on these communities. What factors should be considered to ensure responsible disposal and removal of renewable energy infrastructure after a project's life cycle is over? And maybe you can also just at the beginning just explain what decommissioning means for those not familiar with it.
Right. And so decommissioning as a concept has been around for a long time. It applies to, anytime you are removing a facility at the end of its useful life. Coal-fired power plants go through decommissioning if they're being torn down. Landfills have decommissioning once they're full and capped and closed. And so the concept has really kind of evolved to incorporate some of these renewables projects because, as I mentioned earlier, these projects oftentimes are on a long-term lease. And so that's again part of that gaining the goodwill. The landowners were going to be much more receptive to the project if they don't have this concern that, hey, I'm a 60-year-old farmer, but what are my grandkids going to have to deal with 30 years from now? So a decommissioning plan, what that does is it sets the ground rules that at the end of this project, that the panels will be removed, the structures will be removed, cables and conduits will be removed to 3 feet below ground, so you don't have to worry about hitting them with your plow if you want to, go back to farming the land. And so, establishing that framework for what will be done in what time frame, and then go through a engineering economic analysis to look at what's it going to cost. A lot of these things, there may be some salvage value, aluminum tubing and framing for the panels, the steel for the supports. The panels themselves may have some value as, rare earth materials, that kind of thing. But you have to go through and analyze the likely remaining value versus the cost of bringing in the big yellow Tonka trucks and smoothing out the ground and ripping up the foundations, that kind of thing. And then at the end of the day, make sure that there's some kind of a financial instrument in place, typically like a bond or something that would provide for the amount of money needed to go in and do that work. So, at the end of the project, either 20 or 30 years from now, or if let's say the worst comes to the worst and the developer gets bought out and they walk away, or they shut down for whatever reason, that the landowner isn't left holding the bag. So having a really well thought out decommissioning plan can do a lot to ease some of those concerns that landowners and communities might have.
The key too, Tyler, to that is making sure that you also account for, not only present value, but future value.
Right.
So this
And
much money might be good this
hard.
year, but you have to account for what is it going to be costing in 30 years.
Yeah, and so we go through. We've done a number of projects. We've got a good baseline of costs, but it is really, you got to be a little bit conservative, because if you were to ask me what's the scrap value of steel in 2025, versus 2024? Well, I don't know what's going on with tariffs, what's going on with the Chinese market, that kind of thing. So you got to be fairly conservative in those estimates.
Yeah, and I think really what I'm learning through this conversation, and I hope our listeners are as well, is that what goes into these renewable projects is a lot. Meaning, it's not just your traditional engineering, like the structural design of the turbine or the site development, civil engineering or stormwater. It's all these analyses and all these different things that you have to look at really dictate the success of the project or the safety of the project, the longevity of the project, and all of these other pieces that go into it.
Yeah, and the regulatory approvals too. It's not just keeping the local landowners and communities happy. A lot of the things that I mentioned, you are starting to see, for instance, solar utility scale solar ordinances and things like that popping up. And so communities are requiring developers to look at all these things. The communities that don't have these ordinances, you may find yourself having to deal with the negative repercussions and lawsuits and things, but getting the project off the ground in the communities that do have those fairly comprehensive ordinances, I mean, it's hard to get those regulatory approvals. So that's kind of the other aspect of being thorough and thoughtful in that planning process is just getting the project off the ground.
Yeah, that's a good point. If there isn't a local standard, is there like a federal standard that has to be followed, or?
Yeah, there are a lot of regulations at the federal and state level that apply to any project. You have your construction stormwater permitting, you have threatened and endangered species, Corps of Engineers permits. But a lot of the things with renewables, for instance, does your fence prevent the desert tortoise from getting to its mating habitat? That kind of stuff. Things that really pop up a lot with renewables projects that aren't necessarily as heavily regulated, like the noise, the magnetic fields, those kinds of things. So it's a weird combination of established regulatory programs and kind of a wild west. But again, people are the awareness is increasing on this, and so you have to, we try to have a very high level standard of care on every project.
Is that tortoise issue on the QA checklist, or no?
An
If you're
endangered
working in the
species, we've encountered it numerous times.
if you're working in the desert in Nevada, which coincidentally has a lot of solar installations, yes,
Right.
it is.
Okay. So, Melissa, misinformation can create strong opposition to renewable energy projects. How have you successfully engaged with the public to dispel myths such as health concerns related to wind farms or misconceptions about solar panels harming wildlife? Talk about how you handle some of those issues.
So people fear what they don't fully understand. It's just human nature. And I think dispelling myths, first of all, starting early helps with that too. But I think it's a good education. I think it's taking a step back and it's laying it all out on the line. Remove the jargon and talk to people like they want to be spoken to, like you would want to be spoken to. And, explain to them, this is exactly what is going to happen. I think the key is, respect is a two-way street. You respect them, they will then in turn respect you as well. Being consistent with your message all the way through the project. I've seen some projects take a pretty nasty turn when all of a sudden the project changes for whatever reason. It might be a permitting issue, it might be a landowner issue, it might be whatever. But then all of a sudden now you're not doing, all solar, maybe you're having some wind mixed in with it or whatever. I think you have a drastic change in a project like that and you don't, you're not transparent about it, you're not upfront about it. I think that can really start to set people up and makes them very nervous. And again, your fear mongering comes out. But I think that, there's always going to be people out there that you're not going to be able to reach. I mean, it's just a fact of life. But I think, trying to get them on a, identify them first, obviously, identify your key stakeholders that are having the most issues. And then, having that one-on-one or small group meeting where they feel more comfortable to talk to you, where they don't have, the pack mentality. They don't have these people, egging them on in the crowd, where you can, sit down and actually have a nice conversation with them, visual.
And you can bring them cookies.
Yes. You can always, everyone, I think, is mostly a visual learner, so show them,
Yeah.
lay it out on a process, it starts here, goes through here, and it feeds out through here. And yes, there's going to be the humming noise of the substation. You're going to hear this. It's not,
Right.
it's not completely quiet, but it's also not a vacuum, laying on your nightstand. But
Yeah.
so I think, being consistent, getting that message out there, and being as transparent as possible with these people, and not trying, don't try to snowball. I mean, don't try to, PhD them,
Right.
which is not it shouldn't be a verb, but, to talk over their heads. Not everybody, like, 25 years ago, I wouldn't be able to tell you what shadow flicker was.
Right.
And so, talk to people in just a very, common courtesy manner. And then again, you build that trust, and then everything else will just kind of come in line.
Yeah.
And accentuate the positive aspects of the project for the community too. I mean, it's not just there to funnel money into some private pocket someplace. There's jobs being created, power going into the grid. It's better for the environment, that kind of thing. So we try to emphasize that as well.
Yeah, and I think what Melissa said that's really important, and I wish they taught us this more in school, is you have to be able to relate to people that don't have the same technical knowledge as you. That's really important.
So don't just bring a bunch of engineers.
Yeah.
Yeah, please don't.
That's definitely probably rule number one. But because you have to really connect with people and understand where they're coming from to be able to try to alleviate their concerns. And I think I also like Melissa's idea quite a bit of using visuals that can really help people to see, oh, okay, now I see it. I couldn't really understand it when you were explaining it to me, but the images really help. So I think that's really good. So Tyler, how do you balance technical, environmental, and social considerations to ensure that renewable energy projects are both viable but also community friendly, like we've been talking about?
Yeah, and it is really hard because you have competing forces. You have the communities that their primary goal is to ensure that the project is going to be good for them in the long run. But then we're working for the client, and that's a power company or a developer, that kind of thing. And so they want the project to go forward and generate as much power for as few dollars as possible. So I think that the main thing that we can do is to emphasize that a good engineering practice and a process that results in the best long-term outcome for both sides of it, the client and the community, involves open communication, stakeholder engagement, consideration of all of these impacts, whether or not there's a local ordinance. Let's take a look at these things, because at the end of the day, if everybody is feeling good about the project and it goes through and it gets approved and gets constructed, that's the win. When things get bogged down and it drags out and the cost starts to skyrocket because the landowners start backing out, that nobody wins in that kind of scenario.
Yeah, I like that. And I think we always try to teach this to project managers is you want a win-win approach to your projects, right? You want your company to win, you want your client to win, and you want the community to win, right? So you kind of really have to think about how you can get all the players around the table. And I think what you said earlier, Tyler, is also important. You always want to talk about the benefits of the project to the community, because that's really what they can understand, the tangible takeaways for them at the end of this project and how it's going to benefit the community, which is important. So Melissa, engaging the public, like you talked about earlier on, you have to engage them early in projects, but not all approaches work. So what are some specific public outreach strategies that have been particularly successful in your experience?
I think first and foremost is identify your stakeholders. Are your stakeholders, 85-year-old farmers, or are they 20-year-old, millennials? I think the approach to how you go forward is completely different depending on who your stakeholders are. Maybe you have a mix of everything. So I think that reflects then in the media. Do you use social media? Do you, publish it in a newspaper? Does anybody in the area even subscribe to the local newspaper? Is there still a local newspaper? What's the local news channel? do people in the area have cable? Do they have internet access? I mean, that amazingly, that's still a thing. So, I mean, you need to identify who they are, what their demographics are, and then that kind of then curtails into how you approach these people and your constituents. And so, obviously, like Tyler said, the oldie but the goodie is feed them. Provide food. If you provide food, they will come. Doesn't even care, cookies and coffee or pizza and snacks. People will show up for food, and then you got them in the room, and now you have a chance to talk to them. But the other thing that I've really had a lot of success with, and I'm a huge fan of, is going to where the people are. Meet them at a local fair, have a little, informational booth set up at a farmer's market, find a public event going on in the closest community to where your project's going on, and have an opportunity, set up your booth, have people come over and explain to you, well, 20 years ago, somebody built this over here and then they walked away from it. And that's why everybody in the community is burnt.
Yeah.
It's that information that you get from these people in a non-pressure setting. They're out there buying a head of cabbage from the farmer down the street, and they're also talking about, your renewable energy project that's going on or you're proposing. The other thing that I'm a huge fan, we've done it a number of times, is find a local interested and trusted individual in the community. Obviously, it would help if they're for your project.
Right.
Then you kind of you have that ability then to skip over that trust building element. I mean, you still have that, but you have now this person on your side that everyone in the community knows and trusts already. And so you have that element of, you're kind of building good familiar attitudes because these people already know this person that's working with you. And geez, if Joe Smith says that this is a good project, that I don't really have any reason to think that he wouldn't tell me the truth, because he's not working for the evil developer or whatever. So I think we've used that before, especially like in my case, we were working in a very environmentally justice community, and I know that's not a thing anymore, but high minority, low income area. If I come in there or Tyler goes in there, we don't look like them.
Right.
It's really hard.
You're
That
seen it as an
barrier of
outsider,
trust,
basically.
very much,
Yeah.
very much. And you work for the man. And so, I mean, in that case, we did find a minority businessman that worked in the community, did a lot of public outreach already. So he knew, what he was doing. We explained to him the process. We explained to him the project, explained to him the benefits that his community would see. And he saw it. And so he did help us. He stepped in and he helped us, with some of the key players in the community to kind of garner that interest, garner that support, and help build that trust with the community. And in the end, it really helped us save time, but then also, I think helped us kind of build that good community, those stakeholders.
Yeah, that's great. And I think probably combining some of those approaches, right? Getting someone in the community
Definitely.
and then going to meet people at the fairs. Yeah, my wife's a civil engineer actually too, and she works in water resources, and she's dealing a lot with these PFAS issues across the country. And it's very
Oh, we know about that one.
and it's very similar. It's going to local fairs, meeting people, explaining to them that a long time ago, something happened, and so I think, you're right on there with getting out into the community and meeting people where they are, and getting others that have a voice already in that community to be helpful can really be a big way to go. So Tyler, what final piece of advice can you give to civil engineers who want to kind of navigate the challenges of renewable energy projects and maximize the benefits for the communities they're working in?
So I guess the main thing I would say is to take a step back and look at the project holistically. Think about all of the potential impacts. Don't just focus on, I'm supposed to be designing a access road here, or I need a fence. Think about the impacts of that fence. Is that fence going to be a problem if the local fire department has to get out there and put out a fire transformer in the middle of the night? Think about the impacts of the projects. Try and kind of think outside the box. Obviously having a good track record of experience with projects that have executed successfully, that's helpful, but it's a learning process, and sometimes projects fail, but the best thing we can do is to try and follow those good engineering practices and minimize that chance of failure. And actually, it's interesting, the approach that I have found, that balancing act that I was talking about, it's eerily similar to a lot of your sustainability frameworks that are out there, like the Envision framework, that kind of thing. The community engagement, the looking for additional benefits to the community, thinking about the community. Is your project going to cut off a neighborhood from the main employer? Are they going to have to drive an extra 5 miles? Those kinds of things. So that might be, if I had to pick one thing, is maybe think about it from a sustainability point of view, because that will capture that thought process of stakeholder engagement and looking at all of the different aspects of community impacts for your project.
Good stuff. All right. So Melissa and Tyler gave us a lot of good input on renewables. We're going to come back in just a minute and wrap up with them with a couple of final rapid fire career questions on our hot seat. We'll be right back. All right, we're back with our guests, Tyler Marshall and Melissa Tiedemann, both from Stanley Consultants. We talked a lot about renewable energy projects, but we're going to wrap up by putting both of them on our career hot seat. All right, so Melissa, I'll start with you. Do you have any specific rituals or routines that you practice every day, whether it's a morning routine or a lunchtime routine, or just something that you do that's contributed to your success as a professional?
I mean, there's a couple things. Like me, from a personal level, I like to get up early. I like to get up before it's light out. I like a good workout. So whether it's a heavy lift or kicking a bag for a while, it just kind of clears my head and helps me like relieve all the tensions before I start my day. Obviously, good breakfast and a good cup of coffee. But then I always like to start my day by looking at my calendar. Mentally prepare for what do I have on my schedule for today. I'm a huge fan of taking notes. I still write on paper, but I like to, what are my doables this week? What do I need to get done today? And then what do I need to get done, tomorrow and the rest of the week? But I also like to look at, what meetings do I have scheduled? What do I need to prep for? Who else do I need to engage? I need some answers to help fill these, so it kind of helps me just prepare so I'm not at the last minute struggling to find someone or get some information addressed. But it just helps me get that day started in the right way. So, hopefully everything goes smooth that day.
That's great. Tyler, how about you? What routines do you practice?
So I serve as kind of a conduit for connecting project managers and our technical resources internally. So my main challenge is keeping ahead of my inbox. So the main thing that I do is, the first thing that I do is I go through and make sure that all of the balls are in the air, that all the plates are spinning, and making sure that identify, are there any hot topic issues that I need to address right away, or which fires are just a low simmer, can they be put on the back burner? So basically just going through that process every morning of prioritizing what is the 5-alarm fire and what's just the smoldering brush fire.
Gotcha. All right, so Melissa, have you, when it comes to your own personal development, has there been maybe a book or an author or a course or a framework or something that you've run into along your career that has stuck with you and you've kind of practiced it as you've grown? Anything that have stuck with you from a personal development standpoint?
I guess I'm a big from an author standpoint, I'm a big Mel Robbins fan. I mean, she has a lot of self-help and kind of taking a look at your life and how you can fix it on your own. And I am admittedly a person that doesn't like to ask for help, and so I like to figure it out by myself. And I spend a lot of time in my car, so it's really great that Mel Robbins, a lot of her books are on audios. So, but that's the time that I spend, thinking about things outside, the bigger picture, thinking about how my life impacts everyone else's, and some, of that nature. I don't like to read. I'm not a big fiction fan. I like to read. If I read, if I have time to read, I like to read nonfiction, or, figure out, I like to tear things apart and figure out how they work. I swear I was born to be an engineer, but didn't make it that far, I guess.
You're engineer adjacent.
I am. I pick it up from the guys in the office through osmosis.
There you go. Awesome. Tyler, how about you? Any frameworks, authors, anything that...
Yeah. So I think one book that was really kind of important, actually, was an assigned reading back in college, back in the Stone Age, To Engineer's Human, Henry Petrosky. It's looking at how failure can impact successful design. I think a lot of us engineers, it's just part of who we are. We tend to be perfectionists, and we have this huge fear of failure, and so that prevents us from thinking clearly and from taking risks. And so looking at like the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, the Challenger disaster, the Hyatt Regency, and kind of looking at the root cause analysis of, how did these disasters happen? It kind of helps to normalize the fact that, what, sometimes projects don't go the way you want them to, and it's okay. Learn from it and move on and use that as a learning opportunity. But it also, I think, was very formative for me because it emphasized the need to think about a project holistically. Don't just zero in. Don't just tunnel vision on, I'm supposed to get from point A to point B. Think about what's the temperature impacts on the gasket, on the fuel tanks on the shuttle. Is it appropriate for these types of launch conditions? Just to think about things from a little bit of a sideways point of view, and help to prevent those kinds of errors from happening.
Sure thing. All right, final question, and Tyler, I'll let you go first on this one. If you were to get into an elevator with an up-and-coming professional in our industry, and you had about 30 seconds to give him or her advice for their career, what would you share with them?
It's kind of funny. This happens every time I'm in the car with my college student, because he must like what he sees, because he's studying civil engineering. But we've talked about this many times, and I would say the most important thing is to don't be afraid to follow your passions. Don't think I'm locked into my career. I'm going to be designing influence screening equipment for the rest of my life. If there's a particular thing that you enjoy, like I used to, when I was little, I liked to go play in my grandma's garden and help prevent the water from washing away the soil. Well, you know what? As a civil engineer, you can do that. You can get into environmental, you can get into the stormwater aspect of things. And as you're going through, be an omnivore and experience different types of projects. And if there's something that really clicks, don't be afraid to make a change in your career and pursue that.
Great. Melissa, how about you?
I'm afraid I'm going to have to echo a lot what Tyler said. The old adage is you find something you'll love and you'll never work a day in your life. I when I first started my career, I was like, oh, I want to be an urban planner. I want to do this. And then, from that point, when I was working for the municipality, we started working in a brownfields project. And I was like, oh, look at this huge impact. We clean up this site and, it's just a ripple effect. And so from that point, it's just kind of like, oh, I can do this. Oh, I like to do this. So I think this, never being afraid to ask if I want to do something, and that's why I guess we love it here at Stanley too, is because if there's something that I feel like, wait, we have a really good opportunity to work on this, and it's maybe not something that we've always done, we have a lot of support from management to say, yeah, if you can be successful at this, let's do it. And that's what I love, because every day then it's a different day.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Melissa Tiedemann and Tyler Marshall, Stanley Consultants, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with our listeners here on the Civil Engineering Podcast. We really appreciate it.
Great,
thank you for the opportunity.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Melissa and Tyler. These renewable energy projects sound amazing, and oftentimes they are, but we do need to understand some of the potential harm that can come from them, and hopefully, as professionals, alleviate it for our clients and for our communities. If you enjoy this episode, please subscribe to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.